Horse is a historical fiction novel about a horse. So is this book a yay or a nay? Hi, I'm Amanda, and this is Spineless Books, your one-stop spoiler-free shop for all things audiobook. Historical fiction is quickly becoming one of my favorite genres. The idea that I could be entertained and also learn something is really appealing to me. And I had Horse on my TBR for quite some time. So when a fellow book club member was raving about it, I decided to push it up. I wasn't familiar with Geraldine Brooks, and I didn't know much about the book other than that, kind of obviously, it was going to be about a horse. So I was pleasantly surprised when I found myself very quickly engrossed in this book. Horse is essentially exactly what it sounds like. It's the story of a horse, but it's not just any horse. Lexington is a horse who is essentially the most prolific racehorse in the United States in the 1850s, and even beyond that. And honestly, this book was very much more than just about a horse. Yes, the horse is the main story, but the truth is Geraldine Brooks is packing a lot more than information about a horse into this historical fiction. There's a lot about the climate in the United States at the time, and if you know anything about the 1850s, it's right before the Civil War. So obviously there's a lot happening in the United States, and she gets all of that in there. She also connects a lot of this to how it plays out today. So you're not only learning about the history of equestrianism in the United States, but some of the things that changed in race relations during that pivotal time. You kind of get to see what's going on with those things now, which is really kind of cool. Geraldine Brooks does an amazing job of telling this story from different perspectives. In fact, I wasn't really clear on what she had made up and what was accurately true. And I think it was the blending of those two things that was so brilliant. The woman clearly did her research, and she just wove it in a way that was so impressive. Every character, whether they were made up or really existed, had a very full existence in the story. And I think that was a really, really well thought out part of the book for Geraldine Brooks. People who were real felt real, and people who were made up felt like they could have been real. I love the way that Geraldine Brooks told the story of this horse in its entirety from multiple well-chosen characters. You've got people like Jarrett, his groom, Thomas Scott, who painted his picture, present-day Theo, who's an art historian, Jess, who studies bones. I mean, there are all kinds of characters in this book that really get this horse from every angle. And again, that's part of what contributes to it being so much more than just the story of a horse. You get art, you get literature, you get science, you get the human experience. And I was one of those little girls that really loved horses. I can't say that carried with me into adulthood, but you don't have to love horses to love this book. It's just so intentionally well crafted, and it tells an incredibly entertaining story. While the theme of race is present from the beginning of the book, I really appreciated the way that it ramped up as the story went on. It's not that Geraldine Brooks is trying to sneak it into the story, it's there the whole time. But she does an amazing job of making it more important as the story goes on. And the way that she linked almost 200 years ago to today was really quite smart. Capturing the racial landscape in the United States over almost 200 years is not easy, but Brooks pulls it off with ease. I think it helped that each different character was narrated by a different voice. Brooks writes voice well. It's not that if you had the same narrator, you wouldn't have been able to distinguish between the characters, because you would have. But as a listener in the audiobook, given that the characters were so vastly different, science, art history, actual artist, horse groom. I mean, there were so many varied walks of life that I loved having the different voices in the story. In fact, there was one of the narrators that I really didn't care for, but I think what was actually happening was so incredibly intelligent, because this narrator was narrating a character that had a huge change over the course of the story. And what I didn't like in the beginning of the book turned out to really be method, because as the book progressed, I started to understand why that character was being narrated in that way, and I think it was really indicative of a very smart narrator. I don't want to tell you which character I'm talking about because I don't want to give away who has the biggest arc in my opinion in the book, but let's just say that things changed for me as I listened. Now, I am someone who, when I was in high school, didn't feel like I connected with history. It didn't really make sense. I knew there was a story I was supposed to be getting, but often I just got bogged down by details. When I discovered art history, history started to make a little bit more sense for me. But as an adult who's not really in classes of history anymore, I'm finding historical fiction is actually the way for me. I'm learning so much through novels, and yes, some of it is, of course, fiction. But the stories that a lot of these historical fiction novels are based upon are real. And the way that someone who is a creative writer can inspire me to learn more about a story in their fictional narrative is really amazing. In fact, this is a book that as soon as I finished, I began looking up information about the real stories. And I found myself engrossed in research and exploration. And I think that's wonderful when an author can make you want to learn more with their story. I found this book to be one that I wanted to take my time with and savor. And every time I sat down, in fact, I found myself wanting to back up a little bit just to make sure I didn't miss anything. And it's very rare that I'm listening with that kind of intensity in a story. It just was so packed with details that I wanted to make sure I took everything in. And I took a lot longer to read this book than I usually do, but I loved it. If you love horses, you have to read this book. It's really imperative that you know the story of Lexington, who is just an outstanding leader in thoroughbred racing and really kind of changed a lot of things. Plus, as an animal lover, his story is just extremely unique. And honestly, if you don't love horses, you still need to read this book. If you love historical fiction that teaches you something and maybe puts you in an area that you wouldn't normally find yourself, this is just an excellent read. To me, Geraldine Brooks' Horse was a 5-star read wholeheartedly. But remember, you might love what I hate and hate what I love, so make your own opinion. But thanks for listening to mine. See you next time.